Hey, welcome to a series of business programs in which Ohio University, in conjunction with Ohio State University, present every second Tuesday of each month, in which we look at various different business programs and try to give to the listening audience a variety of different and better understandings in the business world. Co-host is Sarah Burraway. Sarah Burraway is the Director of the Workforce Success at Ohio University Southern. And Sarah, it's always a pleasure working with you on some of these business training programs.
Well, thanks. We enjoy our partnership with Ohio State University and our other regional partners because it's only when we work together that we can provide a learning platform for our area businesses. So we're excited today to bring one of our Ohio University colleagues on board with us. A very important topic, especially now that we are in this online business world. Larry Tumblin is our Director of IT for the Regional Higher Education System at Ohio University. So Larry, welcome, and we're just going to turn the platform over to you, and you can help us understand some ways that we can secure our data and operate our businesses safely online.
All right, thanks, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. I'm going to go through some things. It may seem familiar, but it never hurts to have some reminders. I'm also going to do a little bit of a level set with some definitions so that you'll know what we're talking about. And then just things you can do as an individual and as a business to make sure you're being as secure as possible. We were talking just before it started that in times of crisis, cyber attacks increase exponentially post 9/11, and now especially a lot of phishing attacks, which we'll get into, where people know people already have a lot of anxiety, so they attempt to send messages trying to get information from you or from your employees or from your business that just given the high level of anxiety, you might not pay attention to all the information you're giving. So I want to talk through those things today, some steps you can take, and then I'm going to give you some resources. So I think they're going to send out the PowerPoint at the end, so don't worry about taking too many notes. And in the PowerPoint, I've got some links to Small Business Administration, cybersecurity, and infrastructure from the Homeland Security, and then the National Cybersecurity Alliance, which is several partners, including government and private companies that put together a lot of information. So everything I'm going to tell you is out there. I'm just going to kind of curate some highlights, but then give you the references so you can go back. And it's definitely worth spending some time doing this kind of thing that you know it's important, but you don't do it, right? Until something happens and then you're trying to recover. Where if you just take some time and invest some time and resources in protecting yourself, I think you'll find it easier. And you can't protect yourself completely, but we can certainly try to do a better job than we typically do. And I include myself in that. I'm going to share my screen. And as the tech guy, this better work, right? Because it'd be embarrassing if it doesn't. Does everyone see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yes.
Just a couple of items here. Nothing's comprehensive, but I think if we focus on the kind of things that we're talking about right now, today, it certainly gets you prepared. So we're going to talk about some common threats, some best practices for you and your employees, and just some things about cloud versus local IT services. I don't have a lot of information on that, but I just want to talk through a couple of high points there on that. So let's just go through some common threats. I'm going to do some definitions. This is straight out of the Small Business Administration because it's one of the references I'm going to give you at the end. So I wanted to be some consistency there. But malware is essentially, as they define it, malicious software, basically viruses, ransomware, anything adware that's designed to either bring ads to you or capture your information for their purposes. It's obviously intentionally designed to cause damage to your computer or your network. So this is basically an umbrella term for kind of all the bad stuff people do on the internet as far as like viruses go. Viruses specifically are designed, and I guess this is the time to talk about viruses, but sorry, that was kind of a unintentional lining up of our world right now. But they're really designed to give access to your system and then to spread to other systems. And they give access to that system either to gain data or to, in some cases, it's just malicious, right? I can remember early on when we first launched our website at the Zanesville campus of Ohio University, early days, and we launched it, and within a week, someone just popped up on the screen, some Brazilian piracy thing. And so it was just an annoyance, and it took a lot of work to redo it. So it wasn't really malicious so much as just someone just kind of being naughty, just so they could do it. So viruses, harmful programs, ransomware, this is one that's particularly important, and I want to spend a little time here because this is becoming more and more common. And ransomware specifically is typically through phishing emails, which we'll talk about, or unpatched software or non-updated software. They put a program on your computer that encrypts sometimes the entirety of your hard drive or your network drive. And what they'll do is they'll send you an email saying, okay, we've taken over your computer. When you look, you'll see you can't open any of your files, and they'll open up a few of them to show that they can do it. And then they'll want money. So they'll want anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 to give you the key to open your data back up. I just went through this with a friend of mine. He manages a data center in Columbus. One of his clients had a machine that got ransomware, so it locked it all down. Very important data. Luckily, it was backed up, but they had to bring in forensics to try to recover, make sure that even the data they had backed up wasn't already infected. So they're spending a lot of money, and that consultant who used to work for the NSA basically says if your computer gets hit by ransomware, even if you pay the money, he's had clients that, hey, I'm just going to pay the money. They never get their data back. They take the money and they run. There's no real way to track them. Typically, it's outside of the country, some things like that. So ransomware is particularly nasty, and it continues to be an ongoing presence. It's very difficult that once someone gets in, it's very difficult to recover from. And that's why when we talk about backing up your data, that's very important, because if someone does get a hold of that, you'll want to undo that. You want to be able to back up from a clean source. I should say, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or just interrupt me. I don't mind. I always prefer a conversation anyway. I know it's a little different this way, but feel free to ask any questions. We also had an attack locally here. We have a recreation center on our campus, operates as an independent third party. They're running their own network, and they had all their data stored on a shared drive attached to their network, and they got hit with ransomware, locked down their network drive. We had to restore it from a backup. Luckily, we could. We only lost a couple of days worth of data, but if we hadn't had that backup, it would have been a total loss. So ransomware is particularly nasty, and when we talk about how to protect yourself, if there's anything I can point to that's like, that's the reason to do it, it's ransomware, because that's a very difficult one to recover from. I want to talk about phishing, and you may have heard of phishing. It's an email or a website that is used to infect your machine with malware, or most of the time to collect sensitive information. So it looks like it's come from a legitimate organization or someone that you know. They often entice users to click on a link or open an attachment, or the link normally takes them to a website where it's like, hey, you need to reset your password. So it takes you to, it looks like your company even, or it looks like someone you do business with. And it just tries to get you to put in sensitive information so that they can capture that and then use it. I know Chase was hit with this a while ago. There was a phishing message going around that said, hey, your bank account's been compromised. Please click here to reset your password. Looked very much like a Chase website, but it wasn't. The best one that I've experienced, the most creative, I guess, was one that looked like it came from the president of Ohio University. So it had this big message. I believe it was about, if I remember right, it was about, with all the things going on, we want everyone to change their password. I can't remember the exact content. And boy, it looked exactly like it came from Ohio University. But at the very bottom, it said Dwayne Nellis, President, Ohio University, Zanesville. And of course, that would never be the title the president would use. But that was really the only thing in the main email that gave it away. We'll talk about some things that give phishing messages away. But it was probably the best crafted one I've ever seen. But luckily, I didn't fall for it. But there were, it was very close. But several people did. And that's why I'll say, whenever you get an email from an organization that says, you need to change your password, or you need to do this, or we need to update your information, don't click the link in the email. Just go to the website of the company. So if you get something from Chase that says, hey, we need to verify your bank information, open up a web browser, go to Chase and see if there's anything there about their updating, or log into your account to see if there's any messages. Because typically, financial institutions will use their internal messaging. They may send you an email that says, hey, you've got a new message, but you have to log in to see some secure messaging that contains sensitive data. So instead of clicking inside of it, unless you really know and trust the message, like if I said, hey, I'm going to send you a link to this YouTube video, and then I send it to you, and you're like, oh, okay, this is Larry, I'm going to click on this. But even there, you can say, hey, what's the name of the YouTube video? I'll go out to YouTube and pull it up myself. But unless you're really expecting it, always go to the website on your own as opposed to clicking a link inside of an email. So that's phishing. But let's talk a little bit about spotting a phishing email. And these are the telltale signs, and they get better and better all the time, but typically it's definitely going to ask you for some kind of personal information. And this is where training yourself and your employees or whoever works with you, volunteers, whatever it may be, to, if someone's asking for personal information, again, don't do it through the email, go to the website to see if it's legitimate. The web and email address do not look genuine. When you look at it, it may say something like ohiouniversity.com instead of .edu, or it may say something you're used to dealing with. The web address may look just a little bit off, and that's a telltale sign that it's not a genuine. Typically, it's poorly written, and these are the ones we all know about, right? We were talking about the Nigerian prince before this started, people that are trying to connect with you, and so the email itself looks very poorly written. That's always a pretty good telltale sign there's something suspicious going on. There's a suspicious attachment. Again, if you're not expecting someone to send you something specifically, and an attachment shows up, that should be a sign that there might not be correct. There might not be something correct. And something in the message is designed to make you panic. So it's not the, hey, I'm going to make you rich. It's, hey, we've had a compromise. We want you to, go reset your password. Something that in the spur of the moment sounds like it's legitimate, or it's capitalizing on your fear. And that's why they tend to strike during different crises. Excuse me. Okay, I want to talk in here a little bit about something. It's not new, but it's really become more prevalent in the last year. And that is essentially the essence of a sexploitation phishing message. Typically what these will do is say, it'll send you a message. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago, there were 2 of our employees that got these messages. They will send you a message that has an old password in the subject line. And it'll say something to the effect that, hey, I got you. And when you read the content, it says, I know you've been searching adult websites. I've got your logins for these sites. If you don't send me $1,000, I'm going to show everybody what you've been looking at. So it's very intense, right? That throws people off right away because they feel like they're either if someone set them up, or they feel like, someone's been looking in on their sensitive information. But these are always, no one's actually actively personally looking. They're just sending out these mass emails. So what they do is, let's say something gets compromised. Many years ago, Ohio University's data was compromised. And so I had a password out there. And so it's probably 10 years later, I got this email that says, hey, we know what you've been looking at on the internet. Here's your password and your login. We're going to expose you if you don't send us $1,000. Well, I knew I hadn't used that password in 10 years, so I knew not to panic. However, a friend of mine who happens to be an elder in a church was just panicked. He got the same email, it had an old password, and he was panicking, wanting to know what to do. And I said, hey, don't worry about it. And I said, first of all, you don't have those accounts, at least so he said, right? But anyway, you don't have those accounts, so there's nothing to worry about. They can't, crack a password on an account that doesn't exist. So they're just trying to make you nervous, trying to get you to pay them off. So this happens again. Two ladies, and one retired from Ohio University and one that currently works, got these emails a couple of weeks ago, just panicked because of the content's very explicit, and the language is explicit sometimes, so it makes people very nervous, which is exactly what the message is designed to make you panic does. It does something to make you think, oh, I've got to respond right away or I'm going to be in trouble. So the key is not to respond, and something that looks like that, it's just not legitimate. And I've got a source there about stay safe online, and I'll have it at the end as well, where you can dig into that. I want to talk about, this is something every IT guy, gal, everybody talks about, is about using strong passwords. And this came right out of the government's tips from the National Cybersecurity and Infrastructure. And it's basically devise a way to use passwords. And so it's advice that we all ignore. And I admit I ignore it most of the time too in my personal life. But it's one thing to risk my personal information. It's another thing to risk your client's personal information. So really look at passwords. And the first thing I'll say is that you should use a different password for different systems and accounts. So if I've got one for my bank account, and then I've got one for where I file workers' comp, and I've got one for that, they should be different passwords. I know that's the first thing that we all do, right? We come up with a really strong password, and then we use it on every account, which is okay, except if someone happens to get a hold of that one password, now they got access to all your stuff. So using different passwords on different accounts is kind of a first critical step. Then I talk about using the longest password or passphrase permissible by each. And this is, it's good advice, but sometimes they allow up to 64 characters, right? It's kind of difficult to remember a 64 character password. So it's important to use a long passphrase. Don't just use the minimum characters, at least hit the middle, 10 or 12, somewhere in there. And you can develop mnemonics to remember complex passwords. And I've got an example there. And when you first look at it, it might look like gibberish. And like, Larry, how on earth would you remember that? And it's simply, Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow. And then I did a hashtag # 2001. And I picked a year that's unrelated to my personal information. It just had to be 2001: A Space Odyssey. I'm an IT guy, so I'm also a nerd. So I do a lot of sci-fi references in my passwords and things. But doing that example where you use a sentence that you can remember and just use the first letter of each sentence, or first letter of each word in the sentence, is a good way to do a complicated password and be able to have a mnemonic trick to remember what it is. There are also password managers that you can do, like Google. If you use Chrome, it'll offer to generate very complicated passwords for you, and it remembers them instead of you, which is fine if you're consistently using Chrome. But if someone gets a hold of your physical computer, which we'll talk about physical security in a bit, then they might have access to all of your passwords, especially if you share Chrome across all systems. And I'll say something there on a password manager for Chrome. While it might be great, if you're using the same Gmail account at home and logging into Chrome as you do at work, that means now your passwords there's two places where someone could potentially get those. But there are password managers that you can look at, and in the sources I'm going to give you at the end, you can read about those. But they simply manage passwords for you, and at times you can't even see the password that's being sent in, because you put in a password and that translates it into something else. So password manager is something to use. Something you've always heard: don't use things based on personal information that can be guessed or accessed. So this is birthdays, certainly social security numbers, not something you want to be using. Anniversaries, addresses, phone numbers, any of those things are ways that are little bits that people can find out pretty easily and try to guess. Another one that people don't think about is not using words that can be found in a dictionary in any language. They have programs that try to crack passwords by just running every word possible against your password until they find out what it is. So by not using a word, it helps a lot. That also includes just changing one letter. So the example I think on the cybersecurity site was, let's say you have, instead of the word date, D-A-T-E, you change it to D-A-Y-T. Well, they'll do little things like that too, do common misspellings, they'll do common substitutions. So it's better to try to not use words in your password, but to use, again, some kind of mnemonic to do that. And here's another one that, yes, go ahead.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
On TVs now, I noticed that they're asking for different passwords if let's say we log into Netflix or one of those, and since it may not be connected to the computer, should those passwords also be really stringent?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because in essence, let's say, I watch Netflix on my computer and I watch Netflix on my TV. It's still storing that out there as an account, and especially if it's a password you're using in multiple places. So yeah, I would make those as strict. And mostly on the TV, right, you put it in once and then it's good to go until you change it. And whether that's every 90 days, which people recommend, but if you're like me, 90 days is certainly not typical. I'm lucky if I change it a couple times a year, and I create pretty complicated passwords, and I should still change them more often. But yeah, really, when you put in a TV, once you put it in, it's there. So I would use a complicated one and then only have to change it when you change your password in general. So things like Netflix accounts, HBO Go, all those things on TVs, yeah, because those can be accessed from a computer. So it's the same thing. And they're mainly now securing all of your credit card information, so that's not a big a deal. They used to be able to get into, say, they get an account where you use a credit card, and that's how they get your information. But securing that, I would say, is just as important as securing the rest, especially if something related to your business or using a password that's similar. I would definitely do that. So that's a great question. So yeah, check out, and we'll check out these websites in a minute. I want to show you at the end, just places you can go to look for more information, because this is a good brain dump, right? And you might take away a couple of tips and tricks moving forward, but you're going to want to reinforce it and maybe learn some more as we go. So, so let's talk about backing up your data. So I'm just checking the time there. Obviously you want to back up your data often. Even in Microsoft Windows, there's a setup where you can have it backs up every day, or at least once a week. And it depends on how often your data is changing, what data you've got, especially if it's client data, or customer data, or patron data, whatever it might be that you're working on. And there's a couple things. Doing an automatic backup, maybe it's backing up to like a OneDrive or a Google Drive or Dropbox or something like that. You've got some kind of cloud storage, but also a local one, like a local external hard drive that maybe you back up some data and then you unplug it from the computer and set it aside. So if any malicious software gets on your computer, that hard drive hopefully won't get infected. If you leave it plugged in all the time, if malware gets on your computer, it can also infect that hard drive. That's how ransomware tends to work. It looks for external storage devices to infect. So that's one way. And with that, it could just be, hey, I'm gonna pull off my documents once a week just so I have them, or I've got it set to sync up to Google Drive or OneDrive so that they're constantly being updated. And for me, it's not a both. It's a both and situation, not an either or. Having a couple different ways you back up, and maybe ones where, hey, I just back up incrementally every day. I've got Microsoft Backup running, and I've got a hard drive attached, and that's how I'm backing up, or I'm backing it up to OneDrive. But it could also be then you have an external drive you plug in once a week where you just copy everything over, all your data, not like all your programs, but all your data. To me, I like to do both. I keep everything on OneDrive. I work from OneDrive all the time, but I back up to actually, I've got one sitting right here. I always back up to an external drive. I say once a week, but I'm not as disciplined as that, but at least every couple weeks, I back up to an external drive so that I've got that data. So if something goes wrong, you know, something corrupts on one drive and then it corrupts it on my machine, that I've got at least a week back of data that I can restore without a problem. And again, automating that, we're using like Microsoft Backup that's built into Windows or some other tool. And you can read about these on some of these sites that I'll recommend of software that you can use. If you're dealing with sensitive data for your customers, that you're storing something persistently, whether it be a credit card number, social security number, anything that's sensitive data that would be defined by sensitive data by the government, you want to encrypt that. And there's lots of ways to do that. There's lots of tools you can use. And again, the sites I'm going to show you will have recommendations on how to find that, because that gets in a little deeper, but encrypting the data is important. So if someone does steal it, it's very difficult for them to get into that data. Okay, I just want to go through some general advice. The first one is to use antivirus software. I know that's kind of an obvious one. And at the university, we're using the one built right into Windows. We found it to be pretty effective, but there are lots of options if you want something else. But run something, even if it's a free one. But if it's your business, you know, I'd want to protect it with either the one that's built into Windows or buying something that you feel comfortable with. And again, you can Google places like CNET, C-N-E-T, is a good independent website. And I don't have that one here. I'll need to add that, but they do reviews of software. So just finding what you like. If you work with a local IT provider, they're going to have recommendations. So if you have someone that takes care of your network, again, just double check with them, making sure that things are getting backed up, that there's good antivirus. Just ask the questions to make sure they're being done. Another bit of advice is to have one account per employee. Sometimes, and in fact, this got us a little bit. We just had a standard login at our help desk for our student employees, so everyone used the same one. So when something negative happened at one of the computers, we couldn't really track down, except looking at the time, trying to see who was on duty at that time and then tracking that down. That's how we had to kind of find out who did it. Where if we had everyone logging into their own account, it would have been obvious who was in at that time, and it wouldn't have taken so much digging to make that happen. And you may have this in your workplace, right? That, you know, maybe you've got a point of sale operation and it requires a login, you've got one generic. But if there's any kind of sensitive data on there and someone would happen to be digging around, by having one account per person as opposed to a shared account, just makes it, if something does go wrong, you kind of track who was using it at the time. And maybe it's not even their fault, but it lets you kind of pinpoint what's happening and why. And maybe it's something, maybe they're browsing the internet on the point of sale machine, and so they went somewhere, they got malware involved. Again, it just makes it easier to track what happened. I want to talk a little bit about physical security, because that's the most kind of the human engineering, social engineering piece of this, where people discover things by going through the trash or by walking into an office and seeing a password on a post-it on your screen, just or underneath the keyboard. All these ways it's easy to kind of get access to something just by kind of poking around in the dumpster or whatever it might be. So physical security is critical. This includes keeping things locked. This includes making sure no one's putting their password underneath their keyboard. It's making sure that if you have like hard drives with sensitive data, so let's say you've got a network and you've got a hard drive that's backing up, instead of having it on a computer sitting out in the open, maybe you got it on a computer that can be locked up at night. So any kind of physical security you can do to make sure that someone couldn't come in and walk off with the machine, or someone breaks in. I mean, maybe they're stealing the computer just because they think they're going to sell it or recycle it or whatever, but they just took all of your sensitive data. So you want to make sure that physical security is high on your list. And all those human error things that I talked about is important, because at the end of the day, we're the most vulnerable part of the system. just by not doing things we need, not keeping our software operating system updated, which is number 4 there. Just doing things that we know we should do, but we don't do them, which then creates a vulnerable situation. So that physical security, that, kind of securing the human part of it is important. Here's something people don't think of. It. If it doesn't need to be on the internet, disconnect it from the internet. And I say this, I mean, maybe you've got a computer that used to print out letters and labels and something, but it really doesn't need to be on the internet. You've got everything right there. You input it into a database or whatever. If it doesn't be on the net, disconnect it. There's no reason to have it there. Maybe you plug it in once a week to run updates on Windows or updating your software. But if it doesn't need to sit on all the time to operate, now some of them do, obviously. Lots of our things, again, that's getting into the cloud versus local, which I'll start to talk about. Lots of our services are cloud services. So maybe you're using Google for all, or Office 365. So whether you're using Microsoft, Google's products, whatever it might be, where you've got your email out there, you use their word processing, and so you've got to be connected to the internet all the time, and that's fine. But if you do have a machine that's doing something specific, but doesn't need to be on the net, and you can plug it in once in a while to update things, that's a great way to keep that particular machine secure. And again, this is measuring risk versus reward, right? That may be a pain to say, oh, I'm gonna plug it in on Tuesday nights, so it'll run updates. That's just something you can think about. And then finally, secure and hide your Wi-Fi network. This is important because when someone walks in, they see the name of your Wi-Fi network. Even if they can't access it, they already have a point of information. And all wireless access points, wireless routers can allow you to hide the network, so it's not broadcasting the name. Now, when you walk in and you put in, the name of my network is, Larry Wi-Fi, and I put in the password and I connect, and it'll work just fine. You just need to know the name of it, but it doesn't advertise the name. And that's probably a great way to protect someone from stealing your net time or getting access to your network. So the other part of this is if you have a Wi-Fi setup where you've got guests can connect, but your employees connect, and your employees are using maybe client data over that network, it's important to make sure they're separate, that you hide the name of this network and make it different from your guest network. And there's tools as you manage those that you can separate the two. Again, maybe this is something you're not doing specifically, but something that you have a local IT provider do for you. But just requesting that, hey, look, can you secure and hide the Wi-Fi network name and just leave the guest one open, but separate the traffic, limit what they can do. So that's really good advice. So let's talk about cloud versus local for a little bit. And I don't have a slide on this. I just want to talk about it. More and more what we're doing is in the cloud, right? So if you're running Microsoft's products, it's all in the cloud. Office 365, you got your email, everything's running off of their stuff. Google, same way. You got G Suite, you're running it all that way. And typically those things are great, and they're very secure. The flip side is when they do have a data breach, it's a big data breach. Doing something local, and there's always local providers or mid-tier providers, regional providers that will give you online storage and email, manage your email account, and those are good too. The benefit to them is even they may not have all the resources of a Microsoft and a Google or an Amazon, but they do have a smaller footprint. They're less visible. So they may be a great option for you, and they provide a level of service that maybe Microsoft or Google can't provide you. So it's really balancing how much service do you need versus the products you need. So typically cloud versus local or regional you can look at. Those are still keeping it offsite. There are some companies that are big enough they run their own internal email and all of those things. And that's where it gets risky. That's where your firewalls have to be updated. Someone really has to be patching those servers. So I don't know if anyone of you are running a local, your own email servers, web servers, things like that. But that's where it gets really tricky. You've got to really have somebody that stays on top of that all the time to make sure that you're secure. So while it's the convenient of, hey, I'm on the grid, but I'm off as much as I can be, there's some appeal to that. It still takes a lot of work and a lot of investment to make sure that is secured. So definitely going with a company that they host for a living, I think is is the best. It's more secure. And as long as you're backing up your data to a local place as well, I think you're fine. I want to go over, let me stop there for a second. Just, are there any questions right now before I go into some of the websites? I want to show you, what I really want to do is show you where you can go to kind of get more information. I'm giving you a good overview, but I want you to be able to, those things you want to dig in on, I want to make sure I kind of show those to you, but I want to answer any questions first. Is there anything that I can answer right now before we do that? I see Michael says he's a full-time IT manager, so he'll, good, yeah. So someone that, if you're doing it locally, having someone that's what they do is great. Okay, let me show you, I'm gonna show you a couple resources online. Again, just trying to equip you so that when you leave here, you've got places to go, and these will be in the PowerPoint as well. So let me pop back over there and share my screen. Sorry, give me just a second. Okay. So first I want to talk about the Small Business Administration. They have a really good small business cybersecurity site. And again, you'll have the address, but if you just Google SBA Cybersecurity, it will take you there. I'm going to pop, actually, I'll need to share my whole screen here. Hang on just a second. Are you seeing my website now? Are you seeing the web?
Yes.
Okay, great. So on the Small Business Administration, site, they've got Small Business Cybersecurity, where again, like I said, I took their common threat definitions right from there. But here are some tools that I think that you might be interested in. And these are, everything I've found so far is free, even on the infrastructure, cybersecurity and infrastructure site. But they do have a cybersecurity planning tool to help you create a strategy, cyber resilience review, cyber hygiene vulnerability scanning for small businesses that helps you secure your internet-facing systems from weak configurations. So anything you've got that might be out there. So those are good tools. It looks like I've not gone through them all. On training your employees, I think this is a critical one. You can see here about spotting a phishing email, which I went into, using good browsing practices. There's some good things you can do to lock down your browser, avoiding suspicious downloads, creating strong passwords, all the things that I've already kind of talked about are there as well, so you don't have to remember it. Backing up your domain. There are things about secure payment processing I didn't get into, but as long as you're using one of the tools that are typical through the credit card companies or Square, someplace like that gives you secure. They do have training. They have cybersecurity events and Stay Safe Online, which I'm going to refer to next, as virtual and in-person cybersecurity events. Depending on your level of concern, you can go into those. I'm going to, let's see, let me pop back over here. So that's a Small Business Administration one. Very good. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which that definitely sounds like a government name right there. Only they would use security and security in the same title. But they have, if you Google CISA tips, it will take you to this website. And again, you'll have all these, but really they dig deep into these things: staying safe on social networking sites, digital signatures, reducing spam. So they've got just a ton of good resources. And again, when I talk about patching and updating your software, if you don't know what that means, they've got a great thing here that kind of lays that all out. But just things like running your Windows updates, making sure any specialty software you have they typically have an update schedule where, hey, we release updates every Tuesday, just making sure you're on and run those. But they have a great website. You can really dig deep if you want to. And they have this, I'll show you this other program in a second that they have. Finally, the National Cybersecurity Alliance. This is a public and private partnership, the StaySafeOnline.org. And they have Keep My Business Secure, Learn How to Stay Safe Online. Just a great resource to dig in to that. They have something called Stop, Think, Connect, and you'll see this on a lot of any of the Cybersecurity Alliance websites. So CISA, I think Small Business Administration refers to it as well. And just, again, anytime you have an inkling, just stopping for a second, think about it, and then connect. There's all kinds of resources and tip sheets and videos and graphics that you can use for you or your employees. Under the Keep My Business Secure, they have just a ton of great stuff in there that I can't even begin to dig into today. And I know I'm got a couple minutes till we need to open it up, but those are 3 places where I'd highly recommend spending some time. Cybersecurity Alliance, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and Small Business Administration. That, I do a brain dump today. We ask, answer a few questions, but again, you walk away and you're like, oh, I should do something about that. But those websites are where you can go and kind of dig into that next level. And if you do have some kind of IT provider, just check in with them. Say, hey, are we updating? Are we patching? Is there anything that I need to do to make myself more secure online? All right, let me stop the share there.
Larry, there's a question in the chat that's in reference to the SBA Security page. Can you talk a little bit about the security review by DHS? What does that involve, or what should we be aware of?
Yeah, let me come back to that.
And while Larry's looking for that, if you do have questions, go ahead and feel free to add those in the chat box, and we'll start answering some direct questions that would be of benefit to you and your organizations.
So was it the cyber resilience review from DHS that was the question was about?
Look right beneath
the
that.
on-site assessment?
Yeah.
Yes. Let's just go take a look. I honestly did not dig into that. Here, sorry, I got to get something out of my way here so I can read. So there's a self-assessment package and an in-person facilitated session. It looks like you have to email about that one. I don't know if there's a charge associated with that. I haven't found any charges anywhere, but I'm sure the in-person facilitated probably is something a little different than what I've been looking at. But there is a self-assessment package there you could go through. Let's see. Yeah, it does say the first one's free. It doesn't say the second one's free, so I'm guessing that's a cost. But the self-assessment tool is found there, so I'm guessing, again, I don't know much about that, so I won't even try to pretend to answer if it's how intense it is. But it looks like something you'd have to email about to see if there's a charge for it. Sorry, I don't know more about that. What else can I tell you?
I had a question, Larry.
Yeah.
Most of us that work for organizations and universities, our online cloud storage is prescribed to us.
Right.
But if we're working with small business owners in the community that don't have the benefit of a large IT component to help guide some of those decisions or some of those questions, how do you make that determination for your business on whether which platform you should be using or what's best?
That's a great question, and of course, there's no great answer to it. it has become very affordable to even with Microsoft or Google to get access to the full suites of tools that it used to be only big businesses could get a hold of. So, you know, even to the fact of being able to have your own branded email and all that, that's much simpler. The best advice I can give on that front, and I'm not saying it's great advice, but the best I can give is that typically what you're most comfortable with. So if you're a Microsoft person or you're a Google person, that's the path I would start down until you find something doesn't make you comfortable. There are people that make decisions for all kinds of reasons. And they typically provide very good security. I'm not gonna say that they don't. The risk you run though is no more than the university using Microsoft and I know universities that use Google. So you're running no more risk than they're running. So that's pretty good. You can capitalize on the fact that, hey, I get access to these tools, but even though I don't have a big organization to support it. There's all kinds of things that people will make decisions on. You know, I like the interface of Microsoft better than I like the interface or Google or vice versa, or just whatever it might be. So I can't give a great advice there, except it's always better to use something you're comfortable with. And if you're picking a mainstream product, you're not running any more risk than anybody else. Or if you pick a local provider, so you can feel like you have that support. So I guess that's what it would be. If you feel like you want a lot of support, a local provider can help you. If you're like, yeah, I feel comfortable, you could do this on your own. That was kind of a long rambling question. I see there.
You've got a couple more questions in the chat.
Are there more security breaches occurring with larger companies? Yes. This is the time we talked, and I can't remember at what point, maybe it was before we even started, we talked about during a crisis, this is when there are more attacks happening and where more breaches occur. We're getting better at defending against those, but it's certainly, it seems like a couple of weeks don't go by, you don't hear somebody got breached data somehow about something. And where they're coming from, certainly globally, a lot comes out of China, a lot comes out of Russia, a lot comes out of some Eastern Bloc. What would have man, I'm dating my age there, right? The Eastern Bloc, like something I went back to 1991 all of a sudden. But Eastern European nations, a lot of it comes out of there. Seems to be a concentration. So it comes from a lot of places, but certainly China and Russia probably lead the way, even though it says it's from the Nigerian prince, it's probably not. And of course they're domestic as well, but it's definitely a larger operation. They like to operate outside of US soil and outside of kind of Europe proper, just because of legal ramifications, obviously. So it does come in. Where most security hacks occurring locally is YouTube, Facebook, Instagram secure. They're as secure as, this isn't very comforting. They're secure as anything. I mean, these companies are huge. They're doing all they can. That doesn't mean they don't have breaches. You know, we've seen that certainly. That's again where it's important, I think, to use separate passwords and account names for each of your social media sites. So if one does get hacked, it doesn't automatically mean all your accounts are hacked. So that's where you can protect yourself, just by using different passwords and accounts. Should we do an online banking? So this is a great question, right? The banks get better, but if anyone has a vested interest in making sure you feel secure, it's financial institutions. They do better and better about that. I'm comfortable. I do online banking, and I will say this: within this past year, we had my wife had her online identity stolen. So don't broadcast this anywhere that she can see this, but I told her, oh, you need to change your password, you need to change your password, you need to change your password. Well, she was using the password that she'd used for a long time, and it actually was it was another platform that got hacked, and so her password and login got compromised, but that's what she was using for everything. So we got into our bank. They tried to withdraw a bunch of money. Chase shut them down. Of course, we had to go through all the problems about, we had to shut down all of our accounts, and we had to move all the money to new accounts, and we had to change every transaction we use on online. So it became a giant issue. But from that, now every account she has a different login and a different password. It only takes once and like a month to get it all sorted out. So I think it is secure as it can be. I'm comfortable doing online banking, but again, it's about that. Am I using complicated passwords? Am I changing them, every 90 days or so just to protect myself? And am I using different logins and passwords for each account? Now, if you're like me, I shouldn't say this. I'm supposed to be counseling you, but my social media accounts have the same login and password for the most part, mainly because that's all that I'm using those for. But my financial advisor website, my bank, those are unique logins and unique passwords, and I change them pretty regularly, maybe even more often than I need to, but I'm fanatical about that. So the best way to protect yourselves is to use complicated passwords, change those passwords every 90 days, and use a different login ID for each account that holds really sensitive data. If we get hacked in one credit card, should we close all credit cards? This one, I don't know about you, but I've had 2 times when someone tried to get our credit cards and they had to stop the account. One was evidently from, they talk about those gas card readers where they'll fake it, and it sounds like when I was in Georgia, it looks like I was a victim of one of those. Typically, since they're separate banks, I wouldn't say it's necessary to change them all out. Now, if you're using the same login password and you have multiple credit cards on the same bank, I would ask the bank about that, about should I stop all my credit cards? Typically, those accounts are discrete, but if you got one login and password, like if you have multiple cards, I keep using Chase as an example just because I'm most familiar with them. Like when I log into Chase, I can see these 2 credit cards I have and my checking account. It may be there if I was compromised, I'd want to change within one bank. I would change, but if they're separate banks, I'd be comfortable keeping them, keeping the other ones open.
Larry, I have another question as far
Sure.
as you had referenced local IT providers or local companies. If I'm not a person that's well versed in IT issues, how do I know who I can trust? Is there some set of questions or some way that I can vet a local group to know that I'm not being taken advantage of?
Right.
And
That's
I
a
know
great,
that these folks are really interested in helping me protect my business and to protect my information.
That's a great question. And I guess I would use the same advice I would ask anybody or tell anybody who's asking about, hey, should I do business with these people? Look for their longevity in the community. Are they brand new or they've been here for 10 years? If they've been here for 10 years, they're probably not too bad, because if typically those companies, if they're not doing well, they'll close and reopen another, you know what I mean? They'll shift and try to keep the shell game going. And of course, in a smaller, depending on who your community is, like in Zanesville, I know who's good and not just from reputation. And that's the other thing, is that if you're looking for someone to help you, talk to other business people. If you're part of the Chamber of Commerce, whoever it might be, talk to your peers and say, hey, who do you use locally for this? And that's probably the best. If someone feels that, hey, look, this company's really taking care of me, I've been using them for 5 years, it's great. I think that's probably the best thing. And you can always Google. It's like anything else, right? Google someone's company name and look for feedback online. If you have 1 or 2 bad reviews, they're probably okay. If it's a whole page after page of 1-star reviews, it's probably not someone you want to do business with. If they're new, I think it's talking to them, finding out their background, seeing who else, what references they have. Because even someone new into that should have a background in the industry that they can say, hey, look, I worked for 20 years with Ohio University, and then I decided to go off and start my own company, and here's some references. So again, looking for the same things you would look for in any other business recommendation. especially longevity. They've been around, they got a good reputation. You know, they're the people I want to do business with. Let's see.
We have another question in the
Yeah.
chat. What is your advice for having staff emails visible on our website? Should we hide the email address and use a clickable link, or does it make a difference?
That's a good question. Unless you're really hiding it and dumping it into a form where they can't see where the email address is going to, even if you put, click here to email and it's got a mail to link, anybody could right click that and see where it's actually being mailed to. And I guess this is where personal and professional comes into play a little bit. So if I've got emails for my team and they are, it's, Larry at larrysbusiness.com, and people are clicking that and emailing, I think that's fine. If they're using that for personal things too, then I think it starts to get, the more you blur your lines between the personal and professional, because if something happens professionally and someone gets harassed, you can just shut down that account, give them a new account name, and they're good to go. But if they're using it for other things, it might be harder to do that. So I would definitely separate personal from professional, but I don't mind having them visible. It's pretty easy to find email addresses, to be honest, just by Googling and looking around. But if, as long as you keep them separate, like, hey, this is your professional use only. If something did happen where it got compromised or there was some kind of harassment going on, you could just shut that account down and do something else.
I just wanted to remind everyone who's on this session, we do have an evaluation link that I've posted in the chat. If you wouldn't mind to complete this session, just go ahead and log in there and complete that. But we're running close on time, Larry. I have one more question. I'll know a lot of families are dealing with, teaching and facilitating online learning, and perhaps children are sharing devices with parents or others who are using computers or devices for work. Does that add an extra layer of security concern if those devices are being shared?
Yeah, to the extent that, right, our kids don't always make the best judgment calls, and they're a little more impulsive, perhaps. Generalizing here, of course. I know I'm being very stereotypical about children, but I know my 17-year-old, despite growing up with technology, doesn't always make the best decisions, like clicking on things that people send her. So it does do a certain amount of risk. Again, if you could separate anything you're using for your work, especially anything that may have sensitive data on it, from something that a child might be using or a student might be using for homework, I think that's good. Some of us don't have the choice, right? Hey, in my house, we have one computer at home, so we all use that one. But we just try to use separate logins. The best thing to do is create a separate login for that student. So when they're logging in, they're logging into their own account, which helps protect the rest of the accounts on the computer.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Larry. We're going to toss it back over to Patrick.
I want to thank you, Larry and Susan, for a really good program. If individuals need additional questions, may they contact you, Larry?
Sure. Definitely field any questions that you might have. Happy to do that.
Okay. It's really been a great session. Are there any other final questions before we sign off? Well, we'll sign off and then thousands of questions will come in. Larry, again, thank you very much. Susan, thank you for setting this up. A great session, and I learned a lot.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.